Whispers of the Luminous Vale, Part 2, The Hollow Star Path. The stars above the veil no longer flickered in fear. They pulsed in rhythm, slow and steady, as if welcoming Seraphina back to herself. It had been 2 days since the Temple of Echoing Flame. 2 days of quiet, of breathing, of learning how not to rush. She and Selim had returned to the cabin in silence. Not because there were no words, but because silence had become sacred. Shared. Understood. That morning, she woke earlier than usual. A forest beyond the window was painted in soft blue, the kind of light that only existed between night and day, the world holding its breath. Selim was already outside, as always, speaking gently to the wind, or listening to the hush of the trees. She stepped out, barefoot again, a habit she'd gladly adopted. The earth beneath her skin felt like reassurance. No shoes. No armor. Today, as Selim said quietly, without turning, we follow the hollow star path. Seraphina tilted her head. What is that? He finally looked at her, eyes calm as moonlit water. The second place your light remembers. A faint unease stirred in her chest. She had just started to feel safe, rooted. But some voice within whispered, comfort is not the same as completion. So she nodded. I'm ready. They packed lightly, only a satchel of healing leaves, a small crystal lantern, and a book with blank pages that filled themselves as they walked. The path led them away from the mossy glade, through veils of mist that shimmered not from dew, but from memory. Every so often, Seraphina would glance at Selim, who walked quietly beside her, not guiding, just accompanying. His presence was a constant, like the hush before music. The veil gradually changed. The trees grew taller, thinner, their leaves darker, like shadows soaked in starlight. The wind carried unfamiliar songs, melodic but unpredictable. Melodies that seemed to flicker between joy and longing. We're close, as Selim murmured. How do you know? He gave her a soft smile. The stars hum when you're near your next remembering. They reached a clearing unlike any she'd seen. It was a circle of stone pillars, some standing, some fallen, all inscribed with glowing runes. In the center, a spiral of crystal dust marked the ground, pulsing faintly. Seraphina stepped toward it, and the air shifted, not colder, but charged. Like the moment before a storm, but not a storm of fear. A storm of truth. Selim held out a pendant, one she hadn't seen before. It was shaped like a broken star, delicate and incomplete. This belonged to someone who once walked this path, he said. It only completes itself when the one it was waiting for arrives. He placed it gently in her palm. It pulsed, once, then quieted. The ground beneath the spiral began to shimmer. Then open. A soft descent revealed itself, not stairs, but a slope of polished crystal, glowing faintly with lavender and gold. Without hesitation, Seraphina began to walk. Selim followed. As they descended, the walls flickered with scenes, not memories, not visions, but possibilities. Lives she could have lived. Choices she never made. Faces she almost knew. One wall shimmered with a vision of her living in a stone tower by the sea, alone but content. Another showed her speaking before hundreds, her voice calm, strong, inspiring. And another, showed her in a simple cottage, holding a child with silver eyes. Each time, she paused, felt them, ached a little, then moved on. Finally, they reached the heart of the hollow star. It was a chamber of light and stillness. No artifacts, no riddles, only a mirror. It was not silver, not glass. It was made of starlight. Seraphina stepped toward it, but there was no reflection. Just or a presence. Not her body, not her face, but her essence. All the joy, all the sorrow, all the moments she had hidden or buried or labeled it too much. The mirror knew, and it did not judge. It simply shone. And then, ere it spoke, not aloud, inside, Dove # you are not what you have lost. You are not what they failed to see. You are the voice you quieted, the hope you dared to feel, the dream that refuses to die. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and then another. Not from pain, from recognition. She placed the pendant against the mirror, and light poured into it, completing the star. When she turned back to Selim, he was watching her with a reverence that needed no words. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead, he stepped forward and rested his forehead gently against hers. No pressure, no expectation, just presence. And in that closeness, Seraphina felt something she hadn't in a long time. Safe to be fully seen. Outside, as they emerged, the clearing had changed. The stone pillars now hummed, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. Selim spoke softly. The hollow star is not about finding power. It's about remembering the strength in softness. Seraphina looked at the pendant, now whole around her neck. And she whispered, I remember. The night after the hollow star, they didn't return to the cabin. Instead, they camped in the open clearing, under a canopy of glowing blossoms that only bloomed when moonlight touched them. Seraphina lay on a bed of moss and wildflower petals, wrapped in a blanket Selim had woven from veil thread, a soft, silky material that adjusted to her warmth and breath. Neither of them spoke much, but there was no need. Sometimes, the quiet between two people says more than all the words in the world. Seraphina stared at the stars, one hand over her chest where the pendant now rested whole. It pulsed with a gentle rhythm, not like a ticking clock, but like a heartbeat echoing a truth she'd long forgotten. Do you ever get scared? As she whispered finally, unsure if Selim had fallen asleep. No, he said gently. Then, a pause. But I remember fear. I just don't let it own me anymore. That made her smile faintly. I'm not sure I know how to do that. Then you're already on the path, he said. It always starts with honesty. She turned to look at him, just a silhouette in the moonlight, the soft rise and fall of his breath almost indistinguishable from the wind. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For walking beside me, and not in front. He reached out, brushed her hand with his fingers, just a touch. But it said everything. I don't lead, he said softly. I listen. At dawn, the forest shifted again. The petals closed. The stars faded. And the sky painted itself in soft lavender and gold. a song drifted through the trees, high, distant, haunting. Seraphina sat up quickly. What is that? Selim listened for a long moment, then said, We're being invited. They followed the sound for hours. Through tunnels of silver-barked trees, beneath arches woven from whisper vines, and across a narrow bridge made of wind itself, invisible but holding. Eventually, the song led them to the edge of a glade where the light bent strangely, like water rippling without wind. In the center of the glade was a pool. But this was no ordinary pool. It was black, not because it was dirty or deep, but because it absorbed light itself. Above it hung threads of energy that drifted like aurora smoke, forming shapes that didn't quite stay still. Selim exhaled slowly. This is the pool of dreamed truths. She took a step closer, and the surface shimmered. It shows not who you are, he said, but who you fear you are. She swallowed. And why would I want to see that? Because you can't heal what you won't face. Seraphina stared into the pool. At first, it showed nothing. Then, flickers. A version of herself alone in a stone cottage. Old. Silent. Another, walking through a busy city, unseen. Unheard. Another, younger, crying behind closed doors while others laughed outside. And another, standing in front of a fire, watching people she loved walk away. Each image pulled at her chest like thread unraveling. She stepped back. I don't want this. I know, Selim said gently. But let me show you something. He stepped beside her, held out his hand, and whispered, Look again. But with me. She hesitated, then slid her hand into his. The pool shifted. The images came again, but this time, something was different. In each one, there was a glimmer, a light in the corner, a hand reaching through the crowd, a lantern waiting by the door. Hope. In the version of herself by the fire, Selim appeared beside her, offering his presence, not to fix, but to remain. In the version where she cried alone, the image flickered, and her future self knelt beside her, holding space. No rush. Just presence. Tears fell freely from Seraphina now, but they weren't bitter. They were releasing. And then the pool changed. This time, it showed her. Just her. Smiling. Eyes clear. Not because everything was perfect, but because she had chosen to keep walking anyway. The pool dimmed. Seraphina turned away from it, not in defiance, but in peace. I think I'm starting to see, she said quietly. Selim's smile was like sunrise. They left the glade in silence. That night, they stayed in a grove where fireflies glowed with soft violet light and hummed lullabies in a forgotten language. As they sat beside the fire, Seraphina leaned gently against Selim's shoulder. Not to be held, but to rest. He placed his hand over hers. And that was all. The morning was unlike any other. No bird sung. No wind. Even the trees stood still, their branches unmoving, as if caught in a breathless moment. Seraphina opened her eyes to an unnatural quiet. Not peaceful, not threatening, just vast. Like the world had paused. Selim was already standing, watching the path ahead. His posture was calm, but alert. "What is this place?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Her brow furrowed. "Selim?" Still, no reply. She stepped toward him, concern rising. And then she realized. Her voice made no sound. She touched her throat. Nothing. Not even the air responded. Selim turned to her slowly, nodding once. His eyes told her he understood, and that he'd known this would happen. He mouthed a word, slowly, carefully. The silence grove. She felt it, not fear, exactly, but the absence of certainty. Her thoughts became louder. Her pulse, her breathing, the rustle of her clothing, all exaggerated in the void. Selim gestured, "Follow me." And she did. The trees here were different, silver-barked and twisting toward the sky like frozen streams of wind. The ground was soft, covered in dust-like moss that glowed faintly beneath their steps. At the center of the grove was a stone platform surrounded by arching branches, grown in deliberate curves. A pattern was etched into the center, spirals, circles, stars. Ancient language woven into shape. Selim stepped inside the circle and motioned for her to join him. As soon as she did, her heart thudded harder. Not from fear. From recognition. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. With what? Emotion. Memory. Possibility. And something else. Presence. The runes on the floor began to shimmer. And then she heard it, not with ears, but somewhere beneath hearing. Dove Hashi to be understood. Without saying a word. To be seen. Without having to prove. To be held. Without asking. The air shifted. Suddenly, Selim's presence felt different, closer, deeper. Like the space between them had collapsed. She turned toward him. He extended a hand, not a command, just an invitation. She took it. And then, a flood of feeling. She felt his heart, steady, calm, wrapped in layers of silence. She saw flashes of his childhood, soft green fields, a woman humming lullabies made of wind. She sensed his pain, the moment he let go of someone he loved so they could fly without him. And deeper still, the way he had wandered alone through the Vale for years, waiting not for a mission, but a connection. Seraphina gasped. Tears filled her eyes. Not because it hurt, but because it was true. And then, she opened herself in return. She let him feel her ache, the long nights alone, the pressure to be more, the hidden softness she was told was weakness. She let him feel her joy, the way she danced barefoot in storms, the way stories healed her even when the world didn't. They stood in perfect stillness. Connected. Wordless. Real. After what felt like eternity, or maybe no time at all, the runes faded. Sound did not return. But they understood each other completely. When they stepped out of the circle, Seraphina felt lighter. Selim took her hand, gently, reverently, and placed something small into it. A stone. Shaped like a spiral. Smooth and warm. She looked at him. He mouthed. Truth lives in stillness. She nodded, pressing the stone against her chest. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole in the quiet. They didn't speak again until twilight. As the first cricket chirped and the world exhaled its silence, Seraphina's voice returned, quiet, breathy, but hers. She looked at Selim and said, "Thank you." He smiled. "I didn't teach you anything. The silence did." She looked up at the sky, where the first stars began to twinkle. "I want to carry that silence with me," she whispered. "Not to hide in, but to hold others the way it held me." Selim's eyes gleamed. "That's the path of the veil." She stepped closer, resting her head against his shoulder. And for the first time, no questions pressed at her mind. No anxiety buzzed at her edges. Only stillness. Shared. They traveled for 2 more days in the rhythm of quiet hearts. No longer searching, now following. The hollow star pendant had begun to pulse again, soft and slow, like a heartbeat remembering something sacred. Each step felt lighter. Each breath deeper. The path led them to the twilight fold, a hidden canyon where the cliffs bled light and shadow in swirling bands. It was said the veil ended here, or began again, depending on who you asked. In the center stood a structure that defied logic, a temple grown from stone and song. Its pillars curved like tree limbs, its surface shimmered like dew under moonlight. Seraphina froze. The pendant around her neck glowed steadily now, no longer pulsing, as though it had arrived home. Selim looked at her, eyes full of quiet knowing. "This is the place," she whispered. Inside the temple, silence was sacred, not like the grove, but deeper, older. Here, the air remembered. The walls bore stories etched in patterns, not words. Spirals within spirals. Paths that folded into themselves and back out. At the center of the temple lay a dais of woven crystal and root, and upon it, a pedestal shaped like the pendant itself. Without needing to be told, Seraphina stepped forward. She unclasped the pendant and gently placed it in the pedestal. Nothing happened at first. Then a light. Soft, warm, golden, not blinding, but revealing. The light spread across the walls, activating the stories. They moved, danced. A tale unfolded of a woman born from stardust and sorrow, of a wanderer who carried silence like armor, of a veil that held dreams too fragile for the waking world, and of a bond formed not by fate but by choice. Seraphina's breath caught. The final panel showed them, standing side by side, holding not an artifact, but each other. Her hand found Selim's. A voice echoed, not spoken, but felt. Dovhash, the hollow star, was never broken. It was incomplete, until you chose to open. Seraphina closed her eyes as the light poured through her. Not power, remembrance. She saw every version of herself, scared, brave, broken, blooming. She saw her mother's smile, her father's laughter, her own tears. She saw her life as it had been, and as it could be. When the light faded, the pendant floated back into her hand, but it had changed. It now bore a second gem, one that shimmered between silver and violet. She turned to Selim. "What is this?" she asked. He looked at her gently. "It's yours. The veil doesn't give rewards. It reflects truths." "And what truth is this?" She asked softly. That you're no longer alone in your becoming. They left the temple hand in hand. But the veil wasn't done. As they exited, the wind rose, weaving their hair around them like a veil. Leaves scattered. The stars shimmered. And the veil spoke again. Dovhashi, one last path remains. Not to find, but to offer. Seraphina tilted her head. Offer? Selim smiled faintly. Every seeker becomes a giver. That's the final turn of the spiral. She looked down at the pendant, then up at the sky. I'm ready. They returned to the clearing of blooming moonflowers, where their journey had deepened. There, Seraphina knelt and placed the pendant into the earth, whispering not a command, but a blessing. Let the next who seeks feel held. Let them not be alone. As she released it, the ground glowed briefly, then grew still. Selim crouched beside her. You gave back more than you found, he said. She looked at him, eyes glowing softly. I found more than I knew I was missing. That night, they didn't speak of destinies or temples. They sat beneath the stars, sharing a simple meal, watching the fire dance. When Seraphina laid down, Selim joined her. No assumptions, no promises. Just presence. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she smiled with her whole heart. I think, she whispered, this is what magic really is. He nodded. The kind you carry, even when you forget it's there. She leaned into him, eyes heavy. And for the first time in years, sleep came without fear.